Hollingsworth is in to answer your questions. We love learning about the intricacies of the law and getting free legal advice. That's always a good thing. Leanne.
Well, Michael, intricacies of the law is where we're starting. We have David Hollingsworth here with a very interesting, tragic, recent case, or the decision came down just at the end of January here in Ottawa relating to 5 Carleton University students who were in a tragic accident. And there are so many different layers for discussion in this case, but the main elements that you wanted to talk about first were liability.
Right. So essentially, Leanne, you're right. And what happened was these students, they were in an SUV. I believe the driver was intoxicated. They went through a red light at an intersection and collided with an OC Transpo bus. And so the court listened to all of the evidence, and they determined that the driver of the SUV was 80% at fault, and the driver of the bus was 20% at fault. And what's interesting about how this liability was determined was, you know, we used to rely on eyewitnesses, and the engineers would measure skid marks. Here what they did was they grabbed the GPS device from the OC Transpo bus, and they were able to track the OC Transpo driver's driving. So at first blush, it may seem that the driver who goes through the red light is going to be 100% at fault, but in this case, they determined that the OC Transpo driver was in fact driving over the speed limit at the time of the collision by about 5 kilometers, and throughout the course of his shift, apparently had been driving upwards of 20 kilometers over the speed limit, and it was a snowy night. And so maybe in the past, when we didn't have access to this kind of technology, there would have been no liability on the OC Transpo bus driver. And what's important there is that to impose some liability on the bus driver means that you get access to funds available from the bus insurance or from the City of Ottawa.
And the way this was determined is also quite the formula. So although it was determined that, although the driver of the SUV went through a red light, fatalities resulted. The compensation. Right, so there was, I believe the judgment was about $2.3 million, but because the driver of the SUV was a G2 driver and had alcohol in his system, his insurance limits were reduced to $200,000. And so there was a shortfall of $2 million plus. And so we've got in our system what's called joint and several liability. And that means if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. If the bus driver is found even 1% responsible, then they could have to pay the entire judgment. So the first amount of money comes from the driver who's 80% at fault, and then the bulk of it, thanks to joint and several liability, comes from the City of Ottawa. And that's designed to protect innocent victims and to make them as whole as possible. And viewers have been following this story, but the accident occurred in 2008, and the judgment just came down weeks ago. It just speaks to how long it takes, you know, to go through process. Yeah, it does. It does take a long time. And just if we have a second to talk about the electronic component. Oh, that's a huge component. Right. So nowadays, many vehicles have a GPS, but also airbags. When an airbag is deployed, there are modules, and there's a black box within a vehicle that you can tell the exact speed at which a vehicle is traveling in the seconds leading up to a collision, when they've got their foot on the gas, when they've got their foot on the brake, rates of deceleration, and so it's a very useful tool now in determining. Your job has so changed because there are cameras everywhere as well. So not only do we have GPS and other devices, but things are monitored, and and every second is clocked. Yep, absolutely. It's you know, really the uncertainty related to what caused an accident has disappeared to some extent. Busy intersections have cameras and all the devices within the cars. Not to mention people walking around with their phones. There's a lot of video that occurs.